I'm Fraser Ward. I teach the history of contemporary art and architecture in the art department here at Smith. And I didn't realise till this afternoon that I'm the only man on the program. I apologise for that. And in my defence, I change a lot of diapers. and I'm going to be brief. But I'm very happy to be here, and particularly to introduce our keynote speaker, Susan Hiller. Susan Hiller was born in Tallahassee, Florida. She graduated from Smith in 1961 and then was awarded a National Science Foundation Fellowship to study anthropology at Tulane. She conducted fieldwork in Mexico, Belize, and Guatemala. But by the late 60s, she turned her back on academic anthropology, critical of its claims to scientific objectivity. Luckily for us, Ms. Hiller turned to art, which in her hands perhaps becomes a kind of anthropology of contemporary culture, more poetic but still sharply analytical. She's lived and worked primarily in England since the early 1970s. In the course of her career, Ms. Hiller has received many honours, including a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1998. Her work has been shown all over the world and quite often in Sydney, I'm pleased to hear. She's had major museum exhibitions at London's Institute of Contemporary Art in 1986, at Tate Liverpool in 1996, and there is a major retrospective planned for the Tate Gallery in 2011. In 2000, she represented Britain at the 7th Havana Biennale. Ms. Hiller's work has called on an astonishing range of means, including collaborative projects and seminars, postcards, ceramics, slide projection, video, from single channel to immersive environments, drawing, automatic drawing, there's a work with rose petals, photographs, found objects, archival collection and categorization, text and sound, and that's not all of it. Her work demonstrates an acute awareness of art historical moments, perhaps especially surrealism, minimalism, and conceptual art, and it references cultural phenomena from Punch and Judy to Freud, to Mendelian genetics, to UFO sightings. Language, whether as text or voice, seems a central concern to me. Elements of ritual recur, perhaps a legacy of anthropology. And if I had to identify a major motif, I might venture disappearance of various kinds, of people, memories, words, cultural ways. One of the great things about teaching at Smith is that you encounter so many highly accomplished women. Some of them are in my classes, some are their mothers and grandmothers. As we heard in Ellen Feist's introduction earlier today, current students are very aware that they stand on the shoulders of earlier generations. Similarly, art historians and critics must stand on other scholars' shoulders. Along with artists, we all stand on other artists' shoulders. And Susan Hiller, it strikes me, metaphorically only, is an artist with very broad shoulders. It's terrific to have her here. Please join me in welcoming her.
Hi. I don't know if my shoulders are broad enough to carry the implications of that very generous introduction, but I would like to say, first of all, that I'm really delighted to be here and also slightly surprised. I'm surprised at myself and I'm surprised at Smith. So... Okay, we'll just forget all that. One of the reasons I'm surprised is because I didn't realize that my talk tonight was going to be given a topic that I didn't know anything about. But I think it says in the program that I'm going to talk about highlights of my career. And so I have to begin by saying that I never think of what I do as a career. I think of it, I mean, I could describe it in different ways depending on what my mood is. I mean, I've thought of it as a particular kind of pleasure. I've thought of it as a journey. you know, the cliche about self-knowledge and so forth. I've thought of it as a serious obligation, and increasingly so. I think of it as an obligation. And basically, I just think of it as work. It's my work. It's what I do. So I can't outline any highlights. It's just a job, in a sense. In order to give some kind of way into my work for those of you that probably haven't seen a lot of it, because it doesn't really get shown very much in this country, unfortunately for me, I thought I would just take one little theme, one little element, and just very briefly go through that. And then after that, allow time to show an actual work to you, a video work, a 20-minute video work. And I hope to do this all briefly and in condensed enough way so that we have plenty of time at the end for discussion, because it's more interesting for me to hear what you have to say than to hear myself talk. So we could do questions and answers or comments or whatever you like. So there's going to be plenty of time for that at the end. So that's the plan. I'm going to talk for a little while, and we're going to see a video in the background of a work that relates to what I'm saying. And then we'll just go right into the original piece of work that I'd like you to look at. So could we have the Freud piece, if you don't mind? And I'll just be a little bit autobiographical and say that when I first went to England, which was a couple of years after I left graduate school and about 4 years after I left Smith, I had to work at a number of jobs which were very boring on the one hand and fascinating on the other hand, because they immersed me in life, I suppose. Life as most people know it, just ordinary, boring jobs. But at a certain point, I figured out that most artists in England were actually not doing those kind of jobs. They were teaching part-time at art colleges, and I thought that was a very good idea, and I would like to do that too. So what I did was I wrote about 100 letters to art colleges out of the blue, because I didn't know anybody, and I proposed that I would give a talk. And I got about 10% replies, so I got about 10 lectures. And out of that later evolved, you know, the opportunity to do quite a lot of teaching, which I did subsequently. But at the beginning, when I proposed these lectures, what I was really preoccupied with was figuring out how to do art. That's how I saw it. How was I going to do art? And so in these lectures, I used my background in anthropology, and the lectures drew parallels between the art moves of early modernism and specific ethnographic styles. And in these lectures, I was very critical. This is the theme I'd like to bring out now. I was very critical of what I saw as an unacknowledged and literal borrowing by artists from the arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas. And this kind of borrowing, as you know, characterizes the modernist and postmodernist periods. What I said in the lectures was that the enlargement of European aesthetic horizons in the modern period through the importation of visual ideas that originated in the colonies suggested an increasing recognition by artists that the artistic resources of these foreign lands and peoples could be just as available for exploitation as the mineral and agricultural resources of those places. And if you look at the particular moment, it's always called a moment, in 1905, when Picasso realized that African art could provide a source or a resource for his own work, that'll give you a picture of the way this kind of thing was absorbed into art history. He called it a discovery. And about 30 years later, Henry Moore in England was also calling it a discovery. And the whole vocabulary of this is really very interesting. if you connect it up to, you know, what was happening politically in terms of colonialism and post-colonialism. So these artists thought that there were, and this is another term that came out in those days, that there was what they called an inexhaustible wealth of sculptural ideas that they found in ethnographic art. And mainly, they found the ideas through going to museums like the British Museum and so forth. That's where they located this wealth. And you know, I was very critical of this, obviously, and I said that this was a mythic moment of possibility, and it connected the imperialism of the time with the strategies of artists to find ideas wherever they were, and it was a guiltless kind of thing that just borrowed, took, brought back, remade, unacknowledged. The artists who made the work in Africa were never named, they weren't named in museums, etc., etc. You know all of this. It's now familiar territory, this critique. I hope, anyway. But recently it's occurred to me that you could look at this from a different point of view. You could, and I think I'd like to emphasize a slightly different register, while not forgetting the importance of being critical, too. You could see these mythic moments of the discovery that artists made of this abundant wealth of ideas in the rest of the world. You could see it as a pre-vision, in a way, of the way things would go socially in Western countries. You could see that these moments sort of draw attention to what you could call the fraying edges of Western society. And they could be seen as marking the symbolic beginning of some sort of dissolving of cultural boundaries and an acceleration of foreign influences and a mingling, particularly a mingling of populations. So you could see the artist positions both as the uncritical, unself-critical following through of tendencies that were dominant in the colonial powers. And on the other hand, you could see the same moves by the artists as being productive of a vision of a slightly different kind of future. So there's an interesting problem there. And I think that draws attention to what I think is the way that artists operate in culture, which is to, on the one hand, prop up certain assumptions of their society, and on the other side, to provide a space where a critical discussion of those assumptions can take place. The two things happen simultaneously, and unself-consciously, usually, too, in the work of many artists. So, this kind of thing makes me a little optimistic about the function of art. I don't think art is a decorative or frivolous activity. I think it's an essential way that society examines itself. Maybe we can talk about that later. So, I'm looking through my notes. How can I get through this quickly? Okay. Yeah, this brings me to myself now. So I have to mention, of course, the importance of this to me, this, if you like, a belated recognition on my part that it was the powerful aesthetic lure of the art objects that I saw as an anthropologist